My name is Amanda Foster. I'm 32 years old, and tonight, my husband didn't just break my heart, he stole my children and threw me into the street with nothing but a suitcase. He thinks I'm just a helpless housewife, but he's about to find out that the woman he just discarded is the only one who can destroy him. The scent of rosemary chicken and garlic mash filled our dining room, a warm, buttery aroma that usually spelled home. I had spent 4 hours perfecting this meal. 10 years, 3,650 days since I said I do to Preston Foster. I smoothed my blonde hair in the reflection of a silver serving platter and adjusted my dress. It was the same shade of blue I'd worn on our first date. I wanted tonight to be perfect. I wanted us to remember who we were before the late nights at the firm and the endless gala invitations had turned Preston into a stranger. "The kids are finally asleep," I whispered as Preston walked in. He didn't head for the kitchen to kiss me. He didn't even take off his charcoal gray suit jacket. He just stood by the mahogany sideboard, his shadow long and sharp against the wall. "Preston, the food is getting cold," I said, my voice wavering slightly. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He didn't look at the candles I'd lit. He didn't look at the vintage wine breathing on the table. He just slid the envelope across the polished wood. "Happy anniversary, Amanda," he said. His voice was as cold as a morgue. I opened it, my fingers trembling. I expected a cruise itinerary, maybe jewelry. Instead, the bold letters at the top of the page blurred before my eyes. Petition for dissolution of marriage. "What is this?" I breathed. The air felt thin, like I was standing on top of a mountain with no oxygen. "It's over," Preston said, finally meeting my eyes. There was no flicker of regret, just the cold, calculated gaze of a man closing a business deal. "I've outgrown this life, Amanda. I've outgrown you. I'm a senior executive now. I need a partner who can stand beside me in a boardroom, not someone who spends her day picking out curtain fabrics and cutting crusts off sandwiches." "I did those things so you could be an executive," I snapped, the shock turning into a hot, stinging rage. "I wrote your speeches, I managed your image." "And you were compensated with a mansion and a credit card," he countered, checking his watch. "But the firm is moving in a new direction, and so am I. My associate, Elena, she understands the pressure I'm under. She's already moved my things into a new place." He stepped closer, his expensive cologne, something woody and sharp, overpowering the scent of the dinner I'd slaved over. "Don't make this difficult," he warned. "I've already filed for temporary primary custody of Leo and Sophie. Given that you haven't earned a cent in 7 years and have no residence of your own, the judge agreed it's in their best interest to stay with the stable parent." "You're taking my children?" I felt the room tilt. The walls seemed to shrink. "Preston, you can't," he said, turning toward the door. "A car will be here in an hour to take you to a temporary apartment I've rented for you. It's small, but then again, so is your contribution to this family." The heavy front door clicked shut. I stood alone in the candlelight, the rosemary chicken cooling until the fat congealed into a white, waxy film. I looked at my hands. They were shaking, but beneath the tremor I felt a pulse of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Preston thought he had discarded a housewife. He forgot that before I was a foster, I was the girl who graduated top of her class in marketing. He forgot that I was the one who built his empire from the shadows. I blew out the candles. The darkness was better. In the dark, he couldn't see me coming. The temporary apartment Preston had rented for me smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial-grade lemon bleach. It was a 5th-floor walk-up and a part of the city where the streetlights hummed with a sickly yellow buzz and the sirens never seemed to stop. I sat on the edge of a sagging twin mattress, my designer suitcase looking absurdly out of place against the peeling floral wallpaper. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Preston's lawyer. Supervised visitations scheduled for Saturday, 10 a.m., location, the city park. Please refrain from emotional outbursts in front of the children. A sob caught in my throat, thick and bitter. Emotional outbursts? I was their mother. I had tucked them in every night of their lives. I knew Leo needed his stuffed dinosaur tucked under his left arm to sleep, and Sophie only liked her milk if it had exactly 2 ice cubes in it. Now I was a visitor in their lives, vetted by a court-appointed observer as if I were a stranger. I walked to the small, cracked window. Below, the city moved on, indifferent to my world ending. Preston had frozen the bank accounts. He'd canceled my credit cards before I'd even packed my shoes. He wanted to starve me out, to make me so desperate that I'd sign whatever lopsided settlement he threw my way just to survive. He thought he had stripped me of my identity when he took the house and the kids. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark window pane, I didn't see the housewife he'd mocked. I saw the woman who, 10 years ago, had been the youngest project lead at Miller and Associates. I saw the woman who had negotiated a 6-figure contract while nursing a newborn. I wasn't just a mother, I was a strategist, and I had been playing the wrong game. I pulled my laptop from my bag. It was the only thing Preston hadn't touched, likely because he thought it was only full of recipes and school play schedules. I opened a hidden folder titled The Vault. Inside were the skeletons of every campaign I'd quietly built for him over a decade. The market projections, the branding pivots, the crisis management plans that saved his career 3 times over. I hadn't been idle, I had been his ghost. "Time to stop haunting houses, Amanda," I whispered to the empty room. I navigated to the careers page of Blackwell Industries. Everett Blackwell was a ghost in the corporate world, a man who bought and sold empires like they were trading cards. He was the only person Preston feared. There was an opening for a chief strategy officer. It was a position meant for veterans with 20 years of experience, not a woman with a 7-year gap on her resume. I didn't upload a standard CV. Instead, I drafted a cover letter that began, "You don't need another Ivy League suit. You need the woman who built the man you're trying to acquire. I know where the bodies are buried at Foster and Associates, because I'm the one who dug the graves." I hit send. The hum of the laptop fan was the only sound in the room. I lay back on the lumpy mattress, the taste of cheap, lukewarm coffee still on my tongue. For the first time since the anniversary dinner, the shaking in my hands stopped. I wasn't going to just get my kids back. I was going to take the world Preston loved so much and burn it to the ground.
The lobby of Blackwell Industries felt like the inside of a cold, expensive watch. Everything was glass, brushed steel, and silence so thick you could almost hear the interest rates climbing. I caught my reflection in the polished obsidian floor. I was wearing my last good suit, a charcoal Chanel, and my blonde hair was pulled back into a knot so tight it made my eyes look sharper. I looked like I belonged here. I felt like I was walking to my execution. "Mr. Blackwell will see you now, Miss Foster," a robotic-voiced assistant said, gesturing toward a set of heavy frosted glass doors. Everett Blackwell didn't sit behind a desk. He stood by a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, his back to me. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and a posture that suggested he could crush a company with a single phone call. "You have a lot of nerve, Amanda," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He turned around. His eyes were the color of flint. "Your cover letter was aggressive. Most people come in here begging for a chance. You came in here pointing out my targets." "I don't have time to beg, Mr. Blackwell," I said, my voice steady despite the way my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I have 2 children to get back, and I have a man to dismantle. You want Foster and Associates. You've been trying to acquire them for 18 months, and they keep slipping through your fingers." Everett leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. "And you think a woman who's been out of the game for 7 years, a housewife, as your husband's firm's PR calls you, is the key?" The word housewife felt like a slap, but I didn't flinch. "I wasn't out of the game." I stepped closer, the smell of his expensive tobacco and old money filling my senses. "I was the game. I designed the defensive strategies Preston used to block your last 3 takeover attempts. I know his unbreakable contracts because I'm the one who found the loopholes he thinks don't exist." I reached into my leather portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper onto his desk. "That's their current debt-to-equity ratio, including the offshore accounts Preston thinks are hidden. He's over-leveraged, he's desperate, he needs a win to keep the partners from revolting." Everett looked at the paper. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the HVAC system. Then a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Managing a man like Preston for 10 years, that's not a gap in a resume. That's combat experience." He looked me dead in the eye. "If I hire you, I need total discretion. Preston can't know you're here. To the world, you're still the broken ex-wife living in a studio apartment. Behind these walls, you're my chief strategy officer. We move in silence until the trap is set. Can you handle that?" "I've been living in silence for 10 years, Mr. Blackwell. I'm very good at it." He extended a hand. His grip was like iron. "Welcome to the dark side, Amanda. Let's go put your husband out of business." As I walked out of the office, my heels clicking rhythmically on the stone floor, I felt a strange sensation. It was the weight of the world shifting. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was hunting. The Saturday morning sun felt like a mockery, bright and cheerful against the cold, jagged reality of my life. I sat on a splintered wooden bench at City Park, my hands shoved deep into the pockets of a pilled, oversized wool coat I'd bought at a thrift store. To any passerby, and especially to the court-appointed supervisor sitting 5 feet away with a clipboard, I looked like a woman who had lost everything. But beneath that coat, my heart was beating with the precision of a high-end Swiss watch. "Mommy, look! I'm a bird!" Sophie shrieked, her blonde pigtails flying as she sprinted across the wood chips. Leo followed close behind, his face set in a serious mask that reminded me painfully of how he used to look when he was working in his father's home office. "You're the fastest bird in the sky, Soph," I called out, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My chest ached. I wanted to scoop them up, throw them in a car, and drive until we hit an ocean. But I stayed on the bench. One emotional outburst and the woman with the clipboard would mark me as unstable. A shadow fell over me, long and sharp. The scent of expensive, wood-fired tobacco hit me before I even heard the footsteps. "Still wearing that rags and riches look, I see, though I suppose the riches part is long gone." I didn't look up immediately. I watched my children. "You're early, Preston. My hour isn't up." He stepped into my line of sight, looking impeccable in a tailored navy overcoat. He looked down at my scuffed shoes with a smirk of pure satisfaction. "I just wanted to see it for myself, the great Amanda Foster reduced to a park bench and a supervisor. It's a tragedy, really, or it would be if it weren't so fitting." "The kids are happy, Preston," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "That's all that matters." "Is it?" He leaned down, his voice dropping so the supervisor couldn't hear. "They're starting to ask why you live in a scary building. They're starting to forget the sound of your voice at bedtime. Give it up, Amanda. Sign the settlement.
Give me the house and the remaining equity, and I'll make sure you get 1 weekend a month. It's more than you deserve." I finally looked at him. I saw the arrogance in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he had won. He had no idea that 4 hours ago, I had been in a glass boardroom authorizing a silent buyback of his firm's secondary debt. "I'm not signing anything, Preston." He laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "With what money? You're drowning. You're a stay-at-home mom with a resume that belongs in a museum. You're a nobody now. Enjoy the wood chips, Amanda. It's the closest you'll get to an estate ever again." He turned to the kids, his voice suddenly loud and performatively fatherly. "Leo, Sophie, time to go. We're going to the club for brunch. Elena is waiting." The kids' faces fell, but they obeyed. They always obeyed him. As they were led away, Leo looked back at me, his small hand waving tentatively. "Don't worry, Mom," he mouthed. I sat there until the park was empty, the cold wind biting at my face. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a secure message from Everett Blackwell. "The audit is complete. We found the offshore leak. We have him." I stood up, brushing the wood chips from my coat. Preston thought he was the predator and I was the prey. He didn't realize that in the world of business, just like in the park, the most dangerous animals are the ones you never see coming until they're already at your throat. "Enjoy the brunch, Preston. It's the last one you'll be able to afford."
The office at Blackwell Industries at 2 a.m. was a cathedral of blue light and humming servers. I sat in a sea of leather and glass, the glow from 3 different monitors reflecting off my retinas. My eyes burned, but I didn't dare blink. I was deep in the digital veins of Foster and Associates, and I had finally found the pulse. Preston always thought he was the smartest person in any room. It was his greatest weakness. He assumed that because I spent my afternoons at PTA meetings, I'd forgotten how to read a balance sheet. He was wrong. "You look like a ghost," a voice rumbled from the doorway. I didn't turn around. I knew the sound of Everett's footsteps. Ghosts are the ones who see everything, Everett, and Preston has been very busy. Everett walked over, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He set it on the desk next to my cold coffee. "Show me." I pointed to a series of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, names like PF Strategic Holdings and Blue Sky Consulting. These aren't just tax shelters. Look at the timestamps. Every time Preston lost money in our joint investment accounts during the divorce proceedings, an equivalent amount was deposited into these accounts 2 days later. I scrolled down, my heart racing. But that's not all. He's been borrowing from the firm's pension fund to cover the operating costs of his new department. He's been cooking the books to make himself look like a rainmaker, but the firm is actually bleeding out. He's not just a liar, Everett. He's a thief. Everett leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the numbers. He's betting everything on this merger with me. He thinks my capital will fill the hole he's dug before the auditors notice. He doesn't just want the merger, I said, finally looking up. He needs it. If Blackwell Industries doesn't buy them out by the end of the month, the partners will realize the money is gone. He'll go to prison. Everett took a slow sip of his drink, a predatory glint in his eyes. And he has no idea that the woman he's trying to sell his firm to is the same woman he told was unfit to raise his children. "None," I whispered. I leaned back in the ergonomic chair, feeling the weight of the evidence. It was more than a smoking gun. It was a nuclear bomb. I could end him right now. I could call the SEC. I could call my divorce lawyer. But I didn't want him just to lose. I wanted him to see me while he fell. I wanted him to understand that the housewife he discarded was the one who had pulled the rug out from under his feet. "We wait for the gala," I said, my voice hardening. "He's planning to announce the merger then.
He's already invited the press. He wants the spotlight. Let's make sure he gets exactly what he asked for." Preston nodded, a small, respect-filled smile on his face. "You are a terrifying woman, Amanda." "I'm a mother, Everett," I corrected him, closing the laptop with a sharp click. "There's nothing more dangerous than that." I walked to the window, looking out over the sleeping city. Somewhere out there in our old mansion, my children were sleeping in beds that didn't belong to me. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel like crying. I felt like a storm, and the clouds were finally moving in.
The week leading up to the gala felt like a slow-motion car crash, except I was the one who would cut the brakes, and Preston was the one smiling behind the wheel. I spent my days in the war room at Blackwell Industries, a windowless suite where the air was always chilled to 64 degrees to keep the hardware cool. I watched Preston through the lens of data. I saw him approve a massive predatory loan to keep his firm afloat for one more week. I saw him buy a diamond tennis bracelet for Elena, likely with money that should have been in his senior partner's retirement accounts. He was dancing on the edge of a cliff, and he was convinced he was flying. "He just sent the final merger proposal," Everett said, stepping into the room. He looked tired but energized. "He's practically begging us to sign before the gala. He's added a performance bonus for himself that would make a king blush." "Don't sign it yet," I said, my eyes fixed on a spreadsheet. "Let him sweat. He needs to believe the deal is 99% done. If he thinks it's a sure thing, he'll get even more careless." My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a FaceTime call from Leo. My heart skipped. I took it in the hallway, away from the hum of the servers. "Mom, look." Leo held up a drawing. It was a picture of a stick figure woman with yellow hair holding two smaller stick figures by the hand. They were standing in front of a house that looked nothing like our old mansion. It looked peaceful. "Dad says we're moving to a bigger house soon with a pool. Can you come to the pool?" My throat tightened. The innocence in his voice was a physical weight in my chest. "I'll see you soon, Leo. I promise. Mommy is working on something very important so we can be together all the time." "Dad says you don't have a job," he said, his brow furrowed. "He says you're just resting." "I'm not resting, baby," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'm building." I hung up and leaned my head against the cold glass of the corridor. The rage was back, but it wasn't hot anymore. It was a steady, icy burn. Preston wasn't just stealing their future, he was poisoning their memories of me. The night before the gala, I stood in front of a tailor's mirror in a private boutique Everett had closed for me. I wasn't wearing the thrift store coat or the housewife blue dress. I was draped in black silk, a gown that fit like a second skin, with a neckline that was professional yet lethal. It was the armor of a woman who was done being a ghost. "You look like a different person," the tailor whispered, pinning the hem. "No," I said, looking at the sharp, cold woman in the mirror. The blonde hair was sleek, the eyes were hard, and the smile was gone. I look like the person I was always supposed to be. I went back to my studio apartment that night. I didn't sleep. I sat at the small kitchen table, the one that smelled of bleach, and I reviewed the final audit one last time. Every embezzlement, every hidden account, every lie Preston had told the court and his partners was documented, indexed, and ready. Preston thought tomorrow night was the beginning of his legacy. He had no idea it was the night the world would finally find out who Amanda Foster really was. And more importantly, he was about to find out what happens when you take everything from a woman who has nothing left but lose her children. I closed the file. The sun was beginning to peek over the city skyline, turning the gray buildings into gold. "Game over, Preston," I said to the empty room.
The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a sea of shimmering gold leaf, white orchids, and the clinking of crystal.
It was a room filled with people who traded in secrets and legacies, and tonight, Preston Foster was their king. I stood in the shadows of the arched entryway, my hand tight around the strap of my clutch. The black silk of my gown felt like cool water against my skin, but inside, I was a furnace. I watched him across the room. Preston was laughing, a flute of vintage Krug in one hand, the other resting possessively on the small of Elena's back. She was draped in a crimson dress that screamed for attention, looking every bit the trophy Preston thought he deserved. "Breathe, Amanda," a low voice said beside me. Everett Blackwell appeared, looking like a silver-haired wolf in a midnight blue tuxedo. "The stage is set. The actors are in place. Are you ready to bring down the curtain?" "I've been ready since the day he served me those papers," I said, my voice like whetstone on steel. We moved into the crowd. I felt the eyes on us, not because people recognized me, but because they didn't. I was the mystery woman on the arm of the most powerful man in the room. It didn't take long for Preston to spot us. I saw the moment he noticed Everett. His face lit up with a greedy, sycophantic glow. Then his eyes shifted to me. His smile didn't just fade, it curdled. He almost choked on his champagne. He whispered something to Elena, handed her his glass, and marched toward us, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "Everett, a pleasure as always," Preston said, his voice strained as he tried to maintain decorum while staring me down. "But I'm afraid there's been a security breach. This woman is my ex-wife. She has no business being at a private Blackwell event." He turned to me, his voice dropping to a hiss. "What are you doing here, Amanda? Did you spend your last dime on a dress just to stalk me? Get out before I have security drag you out in front of everyone." I didn't flinch, I didn't cry. I simply took a slow sip of my water and looked at him like he was a smudge on the floor. "Always so dramatic, Preston. I'm not here for the champagne." Everett stepped forward, his presence instantly silencing the small circle of onlookers that had begun to form. "Actually, Preston, she's here at my request. I don't make a single move without my chief strategy officer's approval." Preston's jaw literally dropped. He looked from Everett to me, a nervous laugh bubbling up in his throat. "Chief what? Everett, you're joking. This is Amanda. She's a housewife. She hasn't worked a day in a decade. She's probably told you some sob story, but—" "She didn't tell you a story, Preston," Everett interrupted, his voice echoing in the sudden hush of the ballroom. "I showed you your books." The color drained from Preston's face so fast it was like a mask had been ripped off. My books? "The audit is finished," I said, stepping into his personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne now smelled like desperation. "The offshore accounts, the PF Strategic Holdings, I found them, Preston. The $4.2 million you moved out of the firm's pension fund to hide your personal insolvency from the court. You couldn't have," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room as he realized people were listening. Elena backed away from him, her eyes wide with sudden realization. "I'm the one who designed the encryption you used, Preston. Did you really think I'd forget the password?" I leaned in closer, my voice a whisper that only he could hear. "The merger is dead. Everett just bought your firm's debt from the bank this morning. You don't work for Foster and Associates anymore. You don't even own your desk. You work for me." Everett signaled to a group of men standing by the door, men in dark suits who didn't look like party guests. "Mr. Foster," Everett said loudly, "these gentlemen are from the SEC. They have a few questions about your irregular filings. I suggest you go quietly." The room was silent as the men closed in. Preston looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time in years. He didn't see a housewife. He saw the architect of his destruction. "You ruined me," he croaked as they took his arms. "No, Preston," I said, adjusting the silk on my shoulder. "I just balanced the books." As they led him out through the side exit, away from the flashing cameras and the stunned socialites, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. But the victory wasn't complete. Not yet.
The courtroom didn't have the glamour of the Pierre Hotel, but to me, it felt like holy ground. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and floor wax. This was where Preston had used my love for our children as a weapon against me. Today, it was where I would take that weapon back. I sat at the petitioner's table, my back straight, wearing a tailored cream-colored suit. I didn't need the housewife disguise anymore. Beside me sat the most expensive family law attorney in the state, provided by Blackwell Industries. Across the aisle, Preston looked like a ghost of the man who had served me papers on our anniversary. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes were sunken from a night in a holding cell. He didn't have a team of shark lawyers today. He had a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The judge, a formidable woman named Miller, peered over her spectacles at the mountain of evidence on her desk. "Mr. Foster," Judge Miller said, her voice echoing in the silent room, "the financial disclosures provided by Ms. Foster's counsel are staggering. Not only is there clear evidence of asset concealment during the initial proceedings, but the criminal charges regarding the pension fund make your environment entirely unsuitable for minor children." Preston tried to stand, his voice cracking. "Your Honor, I did everything for my family. Amanda is just—" "Quiet, Mr. Foster," the judge snapped. "You lied to this court. You manipulated the system to leave the mother of your children destitute while you funneled millions into offshore accounts. That is not doing it for your family. That is a calculated betrayal." The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. Crack. "Temporary custody is hereby revoked. Primary physical and legal custody of Leo and Sophie Foster is returned to their mother, effective immediately. Mr. Foster, your visitation will be at the discretion of the state, pending the outcome of your criminal trial." I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile at him. I just closed my eyes and let out a breath I felt I'd been holding for 10 years. 2 hours later, I pulled up to the Foster mansion in a sleek black SUV. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. As I stepped onto the driveway, the front door opened. "Mommy!" Sophie's voice was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. She and Leo came sprinting down the stone steps, past the manicured hedges that I used to spend hours worrying about. I dropped to my knees on the pavement, catching them both in my arms. They smelled like sunshine and laundry detergent. "I told you I was building something, didn't I?" I whispered into Leo's hair, tears finally blurring my vision. "Is Dad coming?" Leo asked, pulling back to look at me. "No, honey," I said, wiping my eyes and standing up, holding their hands firmly in mine. "Dad is going to be away for a while, but we're going to a new place, a place that's just ours." 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my new home. It wasn't a mansion, but it was modern, filled with light, and the backyard had the exact playset Leo had asked for. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Everett Blackwell. "The merger of your old firm is finalized. We're rebranding the New York office tomorrow. Are you ready for the ribbon cutting, SVP?" I looked out at the yard. Leo was showing Sophie how to kick a soccer ball, their laughter drifting up through the salty evening air. I thought about the woman who had sat on that lumpy twin mattress in a bleach-scented studio, wondering if she'd ever see her children again. I picked up my phone and typed back, "I'll be there, but I'm taking the morning off. It's the first day of school, and I wouldn't miss the drop-off for anything." I tucked the phone away and walked down the stairs to join my children. Preston thought he had taken everything when he took my name, my home, and my kids. He forgot that a house is just wood and stone, and a career is just titles and ink. He had tried to break my spirit, but all he did was strip away the layers of wife and mother until he found the architect underneath. And the life I had built now,
It was far more beautiful than the one he had destroyed. I kicked the soccer ball back to Leo, the sun setting behind us in a brilliant, triumphant gold.